A consistent method of reimbursements for meals and/or lodging shall be elected for each travel request, as follows. For domestic travel, a traveler may elect to receive either reimbursement of actual expenses, inclusive of meals and lodging, or the traveler may receive a standard meal allowance typically published by GSA, CONUS rates, plus lodging and incidentals, with receipts for lodging and applicable incidentals. For international travel, a traveler may elect to receive either per diem allowance for meals and incidentals as published in the Standardized Regulations, Government Civilians, Foreign Areas, not to exceed 100% of published amounts, no receipts required, plus reimbursement for lodging based on actual receipts, not to exceed 150% of published amounts. Or the traveler may receive reimbursement of meals and incidentals based on actual receipts, not to exceed 150% of published amounts, plus reimbursement for lodging based on actual receipts, not to exceed 150% of published amounts. A traveler for the city of Dunwoody may be reimbursed for the actual cost of a single occupancy hotel room for travel that requires overnight absence more than 50 road miles from official headquarters. Reimbursable lodging rates are broken down into several categories. Domestic lodging rates. Reimbursement or payment for domestic lodging is limited to the group rate if available. If a group rate is not available, lodging expenses are limited to reasonable amounts of the area traveled. Primary responsibility for the reasonableness of amounts charged rests with the approving authority. International lodging rates. International lodging expenses are limited to reasonable amounts not to exceed 150% of the amount published in the Standardized Regulations for the area traveled at the time of travel, or the conference rate. Expenses will be reviewed by the approving authority as indicated in the travel policy for reasonableness. In-state lodging, tax exemption. When reserving lodging within the state of Georgia, a city credit card payment, an advance check, or other established procedure shall be used to ensure exemption from Georgia lodging and sales tax. Travel Services or its authorized representative will make the appropriate arrangements with the lodging facility and finance when necessary. Non-reimbursable expenses. Additional amounts charged to the room, including but not limited to movies or alcoholic beverages, will not be reimbursed. Snacks and non-alcoholic beverages from minibars can be reimbursed only if included in the per diem reimbursement. When making hotel reservations, Travel Services will consider in the following order of importance: the traveler's safety, the convenience of the hotel location for the traveler's business, and the rate guidelines as outlined in the Dunwoody travel policy. Lodging expenses must be substantiated by a receipt. In order to comply with the IRS regulations, 2 meal allowance standards are permitted. The traveler must elect one of the 2 methods, receipted or unreceipted, and apply that method consistently throughout his or her travel. The unreceipted meals allow the traveler to be reimbursed up to a standardized amount without a need to submit receipts for meals. Receipted meals allow the traveler to be reimbursed up to a specified amount, but the receipt must reflect the amount spent on the meal. The receipt must be a machine-validated cash register or credit card receipt. Stubs from guest checks are not acceptable. For the purposes of determining meal allowances, the travel day shall begin 2 hours before departure on domestic flights and 3 hours before departure on international flights. Travel involving ground transportation shall commence at point and time of departure. The following are the authorized meal allowances, generally inclusive of any and all gratuities. Exceptional gratuities must be documented in writing and approved by the approving authority. When traveling domestically, Unreceipted meals will be calculated at the maximum amount for cities as listed in the current CONUS guide. Receipted meals will be reimbursed at actual amounts not to exceed the CONUS amount plus 30%. All meal reimbursements will be allocated as provided for by GSA. When traveling internationally, unreceipted meals will be reimbursed in accordance with the standardized regulations at the per diem amounts for meals and incidentals at 100% of the current rate. Receipted meals will be reimbursed in accordance with the standardized regulations for actual receipts not to exceed 150% of the current rate. Either method selected generally shall include any and all meal gratuities, unless documented in writing and approved by the approving authority. Method for reimbursement shall be consistent for all meals on a trip. The current rates of international meal allowances are available from travel services. Commercial air travel will be by the most economical class and documented as such by travel services or its authorized representative on the trip itinerary. First class or business rates may be authorized by the approving authority or designee for several reasons. If a statement from the common carrier or travel services or its authorized representative is included with the travel request stating that tourist, coach, or economy class or business class for international travel is not available for the date and time the travel is requested. For any flight segment scheduled to exceed 3 hours. For medical reasons, if substantiated in writing by a physician. Or when deemed most advantageous by the approving authority. A general requirement of travel for the city of Dunwoody is that all travel must normally be by the usually traveled direct route or method. If a person travels by an indirect route or any other method for his or her own convenience, any extra costs shall be borne by the traveler, and reimbursement or payment of expenses shall be based only on such charges as would have been incurred by use of the usually traveled route or method. Travel services shall recommend the most advantageous method of travel and the usually traveled direct route for any trip. When a traveler for the city of Dunwoody is traveling by air internationally, the approving authority or designee may authorize a traveler to use an airline's business class in the following circumstances. If any segment of the flight exceeds 5 hours of travel, or when the entire flight from point of origin to point of destination, including any domestic segments of the trip, exceeds 8 hours. The city manager or designee may authorize the use of private aircraft. Reimbursement for use of private aircraft shall not exceed the most advantageous cost determined by travel services plus 25%. All travel expense reports with airfare must be accompanied by the ticket receipt or equivalent documentation provided by the airline. All unused portions of airline tickets for which the fare is paid or reimbursed by the city shall be forwarded to travel services by the traveler. A statement must be attached explaining why the portion of the ticket was not used. Personal side trips combined with business trips are allowed. Side trips must be taken on one's own time and at no additional expense to the city. Any additional expense over the ticketed cost as determined by the travel policy for the business portion of the trip is the responsibility of the traveler. Personal airfare must be reimbursed to the city in advance of the travel if known. An authorized traveler who alters travel plans for personal reasons must pay any additional cost of transportation directly to the commercial carrier at the time of purchase and will not charge such additional cost to the city nor request reimbursement of such additional cost. Rental cars are sometimes procured for official city business. When renting a car or truck on behalf of Dunwoody, there are 3 key things to remember. Make sure you have authorization, be sure to fulfill state contract guidelines, and confirm that you have insurance. Authorization. Use of a rental car must be included on the travel authorization and expense report, and deemed to be more advantageous than alternative forms of ground transportation. Georgia DOAS car rental cost comparison can be used to support the most advantageous method. Rental cars must be approved in advance. If a city vehicle is available, it should be used in lieu of a personal vehicle or rental car. State contract. Whenever available, approved vehicles shall be rented in accordance with the intermediate or full-size vehicle listed on the annual contract for rental cars competitively bid by the state of Georgia. An explanation for use of rental cars obtained from a source other than the state contract vendor must be justified in writing in advance. Use of a rental vehicle larger than a full size, which is required to transport business clients or materials, must be included in the travel authorization and expense report and approved by the city manager or designee or department head in advance. Insurance. Insurance is required when renting a car for business travel. Employees should normally decline additional insurance coverage offered by rental car companies since the city's insurance coverage covers car rentals. Normally, the state contract for rental cars includes this coverage in the rental rate for authorized travelers. Travel services will inform the traveler if this insurance must be purchased separately at the time of travel. The approving authority may authorize the use of a privately owned vehicle for travel on behalf of the city in lieu of city-owned or rented vehicles or common carriers. An authorized traveler who requests the use of a privately owned vehicle shall be entitled to a mileage allowance at the rate set forth in Section 8 of the travel policy, or the air carrier fare for such travel, whichever is less. All travel which is subject to a mileage allowance shall be shown from point of origin or the traveler's official headquarters, whichever is less, to point of destination and return, and if possible, shall be computed on the basis of the current map of the Department of Transportation. Actual vicinity mileage necessary for the conduct of city business is allowable but must be shown as a separate item on the report. The city manager or designee may grant reasonable monthly allowances in fixed amounts for use of privately owned vehicles on city business instead of the mileage allowances provided for in the city travel policy. Such allowances shall be established by taking into account the customary use of the vehicle, the roads customarily traveled, and whether any of the expenses incidental to the operation, maintenance, or ownership of the vehicle is paid from public funds. Such allowance may be changed at any time and shall be made on the basis of a statement signed by the traveler and filed before the allowance is granted or changed, and at least annually thereafter. The city manager may also authorize in advance travel by chartered vehicle or carrier when necessary or where it is to the city's advantage, provided the cost of such transportation does not exceed the cost of transportation by privately owned vehicles or common carrier. No traveler shall be allowed either mileage or transportation expense when gratuitously transported by another, or when transported by another traveler who is entitled to mileage or transportation expense.